father putting that energy into that child, that maternal instinct, that paternal instinct, building that into a family. That family creates a strong neighborhood, community. That's what America's about, the establishment of the family. And if you look at everything that's wrong with this country, it all comes down to how we've destroyed the family unit over the course of the years. Over the course of years. I often talk and speak about this when I have a chance to meet with groups like you in terms of crime and violence and the issue of race. And there's a couple of numbers that I'd like to speak about: 13, 35, 50, and 90. 13% of the country is black. 35% of the prison population is black. So right away, a lot of people say, that's racism. That's a disproportionate number. If you've got 13% of your community is black and 35% of your prison population is black, we're doing something wrong, and it's racism, right? But 50% of the homicide victims, not in Indiana, in the country, 50% of the homicide victims in the country are black. Remember that? 13% of the population is black. 50% of the murder victims are black. Isn't that incredible? But guess what? 90% of the people who killed them are black too. Do you get that? Now, is that racism or is that something else? That's something else. That's an issue of violence that if we just simply say, oh, that's racism, and we ignore that really we have something else going on, we're not fixing that something else. But here's another interesting thing. People say 35% prison population is black, 13% of the population is black. That's racism. But here's what I never hear. Do you know what percentage of black babies are black that are being aborted? 36%. Now, let's go backwards. 13% of the population is black. 36% of the aborted babies are black. Remember what I said about the prison population? That was 35%. So an almost identical number of blacks in prison, black babies being aborted. Is anybody saying that black babies being aborted is a racist issue?
Yes. I've been saying it for years.
Well, there you go. How about the state of the city of New York? Everybody, you folks probably understand. The city of New York aborts more black children than black children are born. That's an incredible number. It's genocide. It's genocide. And in this country, the Latino population has overtaken the black population, even though blacks have been here for hundreds of years. But what's the problem? I'll tell you the problem. We're killing the blacks. We're killing black people and shrugging over it. Now, I'm not saying that to suggest that the life of a black child is more important than the life of a white child. That's not the point at all. All life is precious. But these are the things that we need to start talking about so that we can understand the truth of the problem. And also to generate sources of support. Because in my view, I believe that you have a lot of people in the black community, if they understand these terms, will recognize that this is something that they need to be involved with as well. Saving the future of their families. So it's the issue of life is tied to the overarching issue of cultural change in our society. We are involved in a rapidly shifting cultural change that has no toleration for rapidly shifting cultural change. I sound like a riddle, but it's the truth. There's no toleration for toleration. You're on one side, and if you oppose that side, we're going to start calling you names. I mean, for example, in the LGBTQ community, these areas are listed as though they are all one thing, and yet they are all different. There is a difference between what gay means and what transgender means. I kind of think I understand a little bit about the gay thing. I don't have much of a clue about the transgender thing. But if I dare ask a question or make a comment short of complete acceptance, I'm a bigot. I'm a homophobe. And in today's society, you don't dare say anything, because if you do, you're going to get boycotted. You're going to get fired. I mean, this is happening everywhere. So what happens? People like you who are thinking like me, we just sit there because we don't know what to say. We are afraid. We are trapped. We want to speak out, but if you speak out, you get attacked. I don't need to be attacked. Let somebody else do it. And you know what happens while you're letting somebody else do it? It's all going downhill. Because nobody else is going to do it. If you don't do it, who will? If you don't do it, who will? I was at church a couple months ago, and our pastor played a videotape, and I got the biggest kick out of this. I've been telling people everywhere about it. There's this guy who's getting these questions out on college campuses. A college, I think it was Washington State, on the West Coast, of course. And he's asking these questions of these college kids, a series of what-if questions. Now, he is 5'9". He's a white guy. He's asking these questions. He says, what if I tell you I'm a woman? What if I tell you I'm Chinese? What if I tell you I'm 6'5"? Well, the only pushback he got was a little bit of pushback on the 6'5". Well, yeah. But for the most part, these college kids were saying that this 5'9" white guy, if he chose to be, could be a 6'5" Chinese woman. Screw the truth. Truth no longer matters. What matters is his right to identify how he chooses. That's an incredible amount of power that suddenly has been unleashed in our community. The power to self-identify contrary to absolute truth. How do I identify? I'm a man. I'm an American. I'm a black man. I'm a bald man. I'm a man with freckles. I mean, I can identify in a whole array of things that are objectively true. But now I can simply change who I am, and I don't have to get an operation. I can just tell you. Now imagine how this would have been in the 50s or the 60s when black people couldn't go to certain restaurants, couldn't go to certain hotels, couldn't go to certain bathrooms. And so all I would have had to do was say, stop! I identify white. And can you imagine one of those southern sheriffs back in those days? That's okay, boys. He's one of us. Well, it doesn't work that way. It just doesn't work that way. There's somebody out there deciding who gets to pick. Isn't that amazing? A couple years back, been a few years now, and you'll remember this when I tell you, there was this woman, big afro. She was a apparent black woman, leader in her local NAACP. She'd been discriminated against. And all except for her mom and dad came out and said, whoa, she's not black, she's white. You remember her? Yeah, Rachel. She's black. I'm sorry, she's white. She's not black, she's white. Now here's a woman who identified as black. I guess we weren't ready for that then. She identified as black. She was publicly eviscerated. You knew her name. Several of you remember this, right? She was eviscerated for what they called cultural appropriation. She stole my blackness. Imagine that. So some people can do it, other people can't. That's kind of the nature of the beast these days. Somebody gets to choose who gets to do and who doesn't get to do. And guess what? You people aren't the ones who get to pick. You're the ones who have to sit back and kind of sit on your hips and not do anything. Because you were the folks who promoted that racist Betsy Ross flag, which I didn't know was a racist symbol. The Betsy Ross flag. I just learned that this summer. The Betsy Ross flag is a racist symbol. Now, this is the America that we are quickly becoming, and it's disheartening because it's going nowhere fast. We see it here in Indiana. You say, well, this doesn't affect us. We're good old conservative Indiana. You know, I spend a lot of my time dealing with federal cases, federal statutes, trying to make sure that the federal government, the federal bureaucracy doesn't go too far in the state of Indiana. But you got to watch out for your state bureaucracy. Anybody here ever go to the BMV? Everybody goes to the BMV. This spring, the BMV announced that it was creating a new classification of people, an X. Now, unless I miss my guess, I'd say everybody in here is either an M or a W. All right? Okay. But we're going to create a whole new classification of people. Now, problem number one with that, maybe the entire problem with that is this. This is a state agency that is unaccountable and unelected by anybody. What right does a state agency have in making a determination that we need a new classification of people? Now, if your General Assembly wants to do that, you people have voted for these folks in the General Assembly. Even if you disagree with them and you want to vote them out of office, at least they have the authority and the accountability to make that call. Not a state agency. So the BMV put this process in place, and a lot of legislators squawked. And so they kind of backed away from it and made commitments that they wouldn't move forward. From what I heard from some of my friends in the legislature, they would move forward on it while the session was out. And then this summer, kind of snuck that back out there. And our office, which has a process in the regulatory scheme of things, made a determination that they had not done enough to publicly address the issue and get public notification, and so we didn't sign off on it. And that's the only reason why it didn't go forward. But there's still a continuing effort to move in that direction. Why do you suppose that the state agency would move in that direction when the session is not in? Why do you suppose? Kind of get it in there, get it taken care of, and then oh, but we've got it now. That happens at your state, folks. That happens at your state. And I want to be very, very clear. I am not anti-transgender. I want to make that very clear. I recognize that there are people out there who have certain sensibilities or issues that I don't understand and I can't necessarily relate to, but that they need to be understood. They need to be loved. They need to be considered. I firmly believe that. But that's not what we're seeing. What we're seeing is a steamroll of accepting of things without regard to what it is we're talking about, and changing an entire structure and culture of who we are. There's room enough for all of us. But it begins by having open, honest conversations about what it is we're trying to achieve and what our objectives are. We need to be in a position to love everyone and understand everyone, but also to be heard and to make sure that we have an orderly society. Pretty simple stuff. What I'd like to do is, because as you can see, I can keep talking and talking, but what I'd like to do is perhaps stop at this point and see if you have any questions